Today is Thursday, December 27th, and I'm joined by Larry Klayman. People who watch Crowdsource the Truth know that Larry is representing Dr. Jerome Corsi in his case against Robert Mueller's special counsel office. We've spoken quite a bit about Robert Mueller on this show, and Larry is joining us today with some basically hot off the presses info. Larry, we've just found out from your publicly released through Pacer documents that despite Mueller's special counsel attempts to deflect January 3rd's hearing, Judge Leon has ruled in your favor and the hearing will go forward. What can you tell us about this?
That's right, Jason. I mean, as could be predicted, the deep state Justice Department, 97% Democrats, 97% people who have donated money to both President Obama and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. These lawyers come in and they try to delay everything. I mean, they're Democrats and they're partisans. So yesterday, one of the lawyers entering a notice of appearance in this lawsuit, the $350 million lawsuit for illegal unconstitutional surveillance on Dr. Corsi and his family, and yours truly for that matter, because I'm his lawyer and attorney-client privilege was violated, as well as illegal criminal grand jury leaks and a bunch of other things that have been going on to try to intimidate, coerce, and blackmail Dr. Corsi into lying about his communications with WikiLeaks and testifying against President Trump. Anyway, they sought to get a postponement, claiming that the partial shutdown meant that they couldn't work. So I filed a pleading saying, well, you know, lawyers frequently work on weekends, we work evenings. The partial shutdown does not apply to the Office of Special Counsel, Robert Mueller. He can send his lawyers over there. And Judge Leon did the right thing. He said, no, you're coming. And that reminds me of what happened in the two lawsuits I filed initially against the Obama NSA and the other deep state intel agencies, when the lawyers came in from the Justice Department and said, oh, we need an extension of time. And Judge Leon said, no, no extensions of time. I want you to know this is a case at the pinnacle of national importance, and be prepared to work nights and weekends. No time off. So the judge predictably and admirably, I might add, said, no, we're going to continue with this hearing. And what this hearing is about is that I signed this case to Judge Leon because it's related to the previous lawsuits I had brought, the successful lawsuits against the NSA. So that's what we're going to be arguing on January 3rd, 3 p.m., courtroom 18, 333 Constitution Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C. I hope people will come and watch, come peacefully, come legally, and watch what happens, because I'm sure this hearing is going to go far beyond related case issues. It's just normal that they will. And don't be surprised if some of the prosecutors from Mueller's office show up as well, because I told the judge that Dr. Corsi was prepared to testify under oath as to what's been going on, to buttress what we put into the complaint.
Wow, so that should be quite a hearing. Now, Larry, you've given us some insight into some of these judges in Washington, D.C., and as I recall, you've always spoken favorably about Richard Leon. It feels like with Robert Mueller's special counsel office, it's almost like we're dealing with a kid who, you know, the dog ate the homework. There's always something. These guys are just putting out whatever excuse they can to kick the can down the road. It's nice to see Judge Leon holding them to, you know, basically holding their feet to the fire, saying it's time for you guys to meet and let's get to it on this.
Well, that's right. You know, Judge Leon is one of the judges that will put his foot down. He's an appointee of George W. Bush. He is someone who is very nonpartisan, and he will put his foot down. And during those first two cases that I brought, which are related and they're similar factually and legally to this case that I brought for Dr. Corsi, he found that the NSA and the other intel agencies were acting in an almost Orwellian police state way, violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. And I got, you know, through Freedom Watch, the only ruling that actually was obtained. The ACLU didn't do this. We did it at Freedom Watch. You can see it at freedomwatchusa.org. You can read about it, that this had to cease and desist. Now, after that, we found out that the agencies didn't stop illegally surveilling people. And this is what they're doing with Corsi. This is what they've done with the president, with people in and around the president, his family, his staff, with General Michael Flynn, with probably former Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And that probably explains why he did nothing, why he put his head in the sand, because there was stuff that the intel agencies and the FBI got on him. So this is a super important issue here that goes even beyond Dr. Corsi into the way the FBI and the intelligence agencies gather without probable cause information on people that they want to destroy or intimidate or coerce to do what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying that since the beginning. Even if people disagree with Dr. Corsi, this is a case of such dramatic importance to everyone in the United States, or that is anybody who cares remotely about the protections that are supposed to be inalienable according to the Constitution. We've got these rogue elements of government that are operating well outside the Constitution and have been doing it for some time. And Larry, I cannot overstate to the audience how important it is that people support Freedom Watch and what you're doing, not just by watching the show here and sharing it and liking it, but people really do have to go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate to the effort, because, you know, we don't have people within the Justice Department fighting for the Constitution. We've got Larry and his small but determined team at Freedom Watch. I don't think there is a lawyer in the world who's done more to challenge these clandestine agencies and to, you know, hold them accountable for, I mean, what is just, there's no way to state this other than unconstitutional invasion of all of our privacy, and then thug tactics, whether it's Manafort or Dr. Corsi. Here's a specific question I'd like to pose to you, Larry. We've heard so much about Russia and how this whole investigation is supposed to be about Donald Trump's campaign having colluded with Russia. We've heard stories about Carter Page. We've heard stories about Paul Manafort. But over the weekend, I had a chance to meet with Wilbur Ross, who, of course, is Donald Trump's Secretary of Commerce. And one thing that I learned just from looking up Wilbur Ross on Wikipedia is that the revelations from the Paradise Papers, that is it Mossack Fonseca, the Panamanian law firm that released all this information, revealed that there were actually business ties between Wilbur Ross and some Russian company. I'm curious why Robert Mueller's office isn't investigating Mr. Ross, but is so aggressively going after people like Dr. Corsi.
Well, they try to go against people they think are the weak link. You know, they know Dr. Corsi's not financially well off like Wilbur Ross is. They can push him around. They threaten him with bankrupting him by putting him through grand jury proceedings, by harassing him. Just recently, they sent FBI agents out to park themselves in front of family members and the friends of family members. You know, all this costs money, and this is why, and I might point out that our lawsuits against the NSA are continuing on, and we have a hearing on January 9th, actually, at front of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Now, that's related to what's going on with Dr. Corsi. My representation of Dr. Corsi is private, so if you want to support the Legal Defense Fund of Dr. Corsi, go to CorsiNation.com and contribute to that. He could use the help. But to answer your question by throwing everything into one little bundle here, is that they pick on what they think is the weak link. Now, Dr. Corsi is a tough guy, and he believes in God, and he's not going to lie in front of his creator, as he said many times, and he hired me, and I'm certainly not going to roll over. And we're going to fight this thing out to the end if Mueller does, you know, a stupid thing and indicts my client, because this will give us the opportunity to challenge Mueller's mandate, his authority. You know, in the words of, I hope my client doesn't get indicted, obviously, but you could use the words of Clint Eastwood and say, make my day, because unfortunately, the president has gotten bad advice, and he's just gotten dragged along. His lawyers, Giuliani and Sekulow, tell him, you know, everything's going to be okay. I mean, it's like Dr. Pangloss from Voltaire's novel Candide. Everything's for the best. Well, Candide got his arm chopped off and everything else happened to him in South America. It's a novel I read when I was a French lit major at Duke University. It had a great impact on me, and I was determined after reading that I wasn't going to lead my life by thinking that everything was for the best, because it's not. And Dr. Corsi knows that, and he's putting his foot down. He's fighting not just for himself and not just for the president, but for the American people, because our justice system is out of control. It's being run by criminals like Mueller and his staff. And, we're going to talk about the Bundy case. This is another example of the more than heavy-handedness of our so-called Department of Injustice today. And I'm an alumnus, I believed in it. I was proud when I went there, and they offered me, several positions in the antitrust division, and I took one. I mean, that was the equivalent of going to Harvard or Yale, or what, even though I wouldn't want to go to those schools. But that was the pinnacle of being a young lawyer, to be in the Justice Department. And now, the Justice Department has frankly become a Department of Injustice. It's a cesspool of corruption, and you see it in a number of instances.
It's true, Larry, and the more we learn, the more clear that becomes. I mean, it's so crazy. You look at some of these left-wing websites, and they say that these type of statements are radical in some way, but it is just so clear. I mean, you, of course, represented the Bundy family. It's now been determined, were wrongfully imprisoned, prosecutorial misconduct. The judge threw the case out after these men spent 2 years in prison. I don't think most people, including myself, can fully appreciate the torturous nature of a life in prison for 2 years. And now, even under President Trump, they're back trying to overturn. Isn't this double jeopardy? How can this be happening? Can you give us some detail about what's happening to the Bundys?
I'll give you a quick summary. Please go to Cliven Bundy Defense Fund .org. Cliven Bundy Defense Fund.org. We need the contributions there in his defense fund to do what I'm about ready to tell you we need to do.
Okay.
But this case began with a successful standoff at Bunkerville when goons of the Bureau of Land Management, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office tried to run Cliven off the land that his family ranched for 150 years, because they want to sell it out from under him. This was Harry Reid and his corrupt son in downtown Las Vegas, also a lawyer,
right,
to Chinese environmental interests. They were undoubtedly likely to get kickbacks for doing that. It's federally claimed land. But when Cliven resisted and said, no, I will not roll over, the lives of his family were threatened. There were sharpshooters, snipers sent to the ranch. He was surrounded with that. His sister Margaret was assaulted, thrown to the ground. His sons were tased. The bulls in his herd, which you need to procreate to continue in business, many of them were killed, buried in a secret mass grave.
Wow.
And ultimately, people came to help him. It was like Field of Dreams in a way, is that people came on horseback and other ways, and they came armed legally under the Second Amendment, and they came to protest. And when the government stood down, to use the term loosely government, I don't consider this to be a government. This is a tyranny. But when they stood down and left, it was still the Obama administration. And 2 years later, they used an excuse with another peaceful protest in Oregon, which the Bundy sons participated in, ultimately were acquitted. They represented themselves pro se. A protester was shot in the back, LaVoy Finnegan, by an FBI agent in cold blood.
Yeah.
Killed. Anyway, they indicted, in and around that time, Cliven, his sons Ryan and Ammon, Davey, Mel, and scores of other peaceful protesters. Now, when that happened, this case was assigned to a judge who had been recommended to the bench by Harry Reid, you guessed it, appointed by Barack Obama, Judge Gloria Navarro. And she had to pay back that privilege to be on the bench to her benefactors. So what she did immediately was to throw Cliven in solitary confinement for no reason. And he was there for a very long period of time. Denied all of the defendants bail. They weren't a threat to anybody. The Bundys are God-fearing people, and they've never harmed a hair on anybody's head, and wouldn't. But yes, they spent 2 years in prison. And when finally their case came to trial, because the corrupt prosecutor, Steve Myre, and Daniel Sheese and Gloria and Ahmed, I forget her last name, the third prosecutor on the case, they did everything they could to convict the defendants and put them away for life. First two trials mostly ended in acquittals for defendants or mistrials because the jury just didn't buy it, like they didn't buy it in Oregon, what was going on. But then when it got to Cliven's trial, we uncovered, and Ryan Bundy was instrumental in this, that in fact, the prosecutors were lying to the judge. They hadn't turned over all of the Brady exculpatory evidence that could help acquit the Bundys. FBI agents, BLM agents were caught lying on the witness stand. And last but not least, a whistleblower came forward by the name of Larry Wooten, one of the supervisors of the Bureau of Land Management. And he revealed that on the walls of Bureau of Land Management were kill lists of the Bundys, and that they were being called retards, subhuman. And when this whistleblower came forward, it was this corrupt prosecutor, Steve Myre, the #2 lawyer in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada, who intimidated him, threatened him, tried to shut him up. And this came up just at the time that Judge Navarro, who had not been favorably disposed to the Bundys, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the mainstream homestream paper, said the prosecutors have a friend in Judge Gloria Navarro. And they talked about how she had violated the constitutional rights of the Bundys and the other defendants. But even she now then had to dismiss this case to save her own skin because she had gone way out on a limb. But she dismissed it not out of the goodness of her heart, not because it was the right thing to do. I believe she dismissed it, and so did the Bundys, because she was protecting her benefactor, Harry Reid. She didn't want Larry Wooten to have to testify under oath. He has never testified. So fast forward, I had been lobbying Attorney General Jeff Sessions from the time that he was confirmed to review this case, to dismiss it. It was a political prosecution. At one point, Cliven made a remark. He used the word Negro. He didn't mean any harm. He was talking about how his family was being treated like the Negro in the Old South. And Obama took offense to that. You can see that at ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, and effectively threatened Cliven and the family with prosecution. And it came to be. And in fact, the prosecutions came down under Attorney General Loretta Lynch at the time. Holder had been the Attorney General when all this was going on in the first place. And, so I asked Sessions, review this thing, dismiss it. And he finally agreed to review it after Navarro dismissed the supersedious indictment. But nothing ever happened. And in fact, a notice of appeal was filed. And I tried to be diplomatic with the Justice Department. The entity which is handling this appeal is inside of the same U.S. Attorney's Office that has committed crimes, that withheld exculpatory evidence, that lied to the judge, that suborned perjury of FBI agents and BLM agents. These prosecutors, Myre, Sheese, and Ahmed, they're the ones that should be indicted, tried, convicted, and put in prison. And I've even filed complaints at the Justice Department with the Office of Professional Responsibility and the Inspector General to review this. Nothing's happened. I went to court to force a review. And just last week, we found out that the department is going to continue with this appeal. I wrote a very strong letter to the Solicitor General, who sits on top of the appellate lawyers, including the one, Elizabeth White, who's a real piece of work in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada. Just a really hateful individual and low class and unethical, in my opinion. I'll be blunt about it. And I said, you got to dismiss this case. You shouldn't continue with the appeal. Withdraw the appellate notice. So again, go to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org. See this letter, but we need the funds now to defend this appeal. It's really important, and it's very complex, and there's a huge transcript, and there's a lot of work that's going to go into this. So please donate to ClivenBundyDefenseFund.org, because to put this family through this again, to send it up to the Ninth Circuit, and nothing's certain at the Ninth Circuit, as you know, to have these good people, relegated to another trial with the prospect of life imprisonment is unfathomable. It's unconscionable. It's illegal. It's criminal.
It's surprising as well, Larry. I mean, how is it not double jeopardy? If they dismiss the case and find that there was prosecutorial misconduct, how are they able to appeal it? I don't understand.
Well, because when it's dismissed, in other words, it didn't go to a jury, so it was dismissed by the judge. They can appeal the judge's dismissal. And are they likely to succeed? Probably not. But like I said, anything can happen at the ultra-leftist Ninth Circuit. And they're judges, they're conservative judges on the Ninth Circuit that aren't exactly, they don't have all their marbles. So it's like Judge Bibian, who made some bad rulings, keeping me out of the case at the time. So this is something that we really need the help of the American people. And there is one good judge up there, Judge Ronald Gould. He's actually a liberal. He's an honest man. And I hope that he ultimately winds up on the panel of this appeal. But we need strong financial support. Go to clivenbundydefensefund.org and contribute. Can't say it enough.
Yeah, it really is important. I mean, again, this is another case where I personally believe that even if people think that the Bundys, if you don't agree with their politics, if you don't agree with what they did with the cows or whatever, I just think it's outrageous for the government to be, let's face it, they're framing people, they're using thug tactics. I've never heard before right now that the male animals of the herd were specifically targeted and assassinated. That's not something that they would be doing in the process of trying to retake the land. That's a deliberate attempt to destroy the business of the Bundys. I don't know anything about cattle, but I know that, the genetics of a strong bull or whatever, first of all, they've got to be expensive. Second of all, destroying them like that, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, that's obviously targeting.
It is. And Cliven, is kind of an artist in a way. I love Cliven. He's like my brother at this point. This is such a good family.
Yeah.
They're so righteous. When Cliven came out of the courtroom the day that the indictment was dismissed, he looked to heaven and he thanked the Heavenly Father for rain, because ranchers need rain. And that's the segue. Cliven actually invented a breed of cattle that would survive on this very arid land in Bunkerville. He crossed a Hereford cattle with a Brahma bull because there's not a lot to eat out there, and it's very, very dry. So they were killing Cliven's, creation, his offspring, his kids, his cow kids, and just vicious. And when they left, when the Bureau of Land Management, FBI left, they had actually hired mercenaries to come in, mercenary cowboys. Carol Bundy, Cliven's wife, found all these liquor bottles laid around. I mean, they were celebrating like this was some great event that they were going to take the Bundys out and kill them. And,
Wow.
And make no mistake about it, they were hoping the Bundys and the protesters would start something so they would mow them down, but they didn't do that, and they stood them down. And this is part and parcel of what's going on with the president, with our Justice Department and the FBI, what's going on with Dr. Corsi, what's going on with another one of my clients, Schaefer Cox, a very good Christian kid that was set up and convicted in Alaska because he uncovered this huge drug and human trafficking ring with young Eskimo boys, where gays and others were exploiting these young boys. And this is something that caused the authorities, both state and federal, who were involved in this racketeering scheme to set Schaefer Cox up. They conducted, an entrapment, a sting. He got upset. They tried to take his child away from him, and in family court, they used his wife against him, which she didn't want. And he wound up getting convicted for 33 years of attempted murder and conspiracy.
33?
Yeah, he didn't lay a hand on anybody. Now he's doing time in the worst federal prison in the United States in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Whoa.
And it's the only prison that still executes prisoners in a federal system, that get the death penalty. It's the prison that executed Timothy McVeigh. And the cell block of Schaefer Cox, if you can believe this, Jason, are radicalized Muslims, some of them likely coming from Guantanamo. Obama probably sent him there. This is a prison built in 1938. When you drive up to it, you think that this is a horror movie, okay? It's medieval. And when I was out there visiting with Schaefer just a few weeks ago, the prison officials likely turned the heat off. It was about 25 degrees, hoping that I'd leave sooner. And I mean, so when Schaefer complained, about what happened, they recently threw him into solitary confinement. I'm trying to get him out. I'm trying to get, along with another lawyer, a federal public defender, to have the indictment, the conviction thrown out. Half of it was thrown out already, the attempted murder part. They still have conspiracy. Tell me how you can conspire to murder if you can't attempt to murder. It's really hard to understand. It was Ninth Circuit to do that. They did it. Give it Ninth Circuit credit in this regard. And I'm trying to get him transferred to another prison, while we try to get him out permanently. That isn't so medieval and so dangerous for him. But this is the federal system. It has so deteriorated. And you got to read, I just brought a lawsuit against a guy named Bill Fulton, who was one of the FBI informants, who doesn't like Schaefer because he came on the Schaefer, and Schaefer, turned his advances down.
Wow.
Sex advances down. And they set him up. And this young kid, who's a rising star, ran for the state legislature in Alaska, formed a militia, a peaceful militia. It's legal under the Second Amendment. The federal government said, we have to crush this guy because he can unite all the militias throughout this country. And he's so influential that we have to destroy him. This guy is a superstar. I've never met somebody as intelligent as Schaefer Cox. So, this is another example, whether it's Jerome Corsi, the Bundy, Schaefer Cox, others. When the federal government goes after you and they want to crush you, unless you stand up to them, they will succeed.
So Larry, Schaefer Cox has done nothing. He revealed that there was a human trafficking ring that was taking advantage of young boys, and as a result of that was set up by an FBI provocateur, an FBI informant, whatever we want to call him, and he's now in prison.
That's right, and he needs your support too. I'm also representing him privately.
We got to think about that for a second.
Years, Jason, I've become a criminal defense lawyer more and more because I'll tell you something. If I had to go back, I would never be a prosecutor of the Department of Justice. I'd rather flip hamburgers at McDonald's because that's how corrupt it's become. I'd rather be a criminal defense lawyer at this point. The government is so oppressive and so out of control, particularly at my former alma mater, that this is how I want to spend my remaining years as a lawyer.
Larry, this is unbelievable. I mean, I've heard you mention Schaefer Cox, but I've never heard the story before, and this is really I'm blown away by this, because here's a guy now who's living every day in a maximum security federal prison. Okay, so whether it's 1 week or 1 year, once you get in there, your safety, your health, all of that basically goes out the window. What's to stop someone from stabbing this guy with a dirty shank that gives him hepatitis C, or raping him, or beating his head in, or doing anything in a split second that could change this guy's life because some corrupt prosecutor stuck him into this system because some corrupt FBI informant thought he should be there. Larry, I want to ask you a question. There's a Wikipedia page here about the FBI Counterterrorism Division. And, before I started talking with you and going to some of these trials and getting into some of these things, I never heard about exculpatory evidence and, Brady violations and things like this. It seems to be a regular practice, but these are serious, serious matters that disrupt people's lives, put innocent people in jail. The very first sentence on this Wikipedia page about the FBI Counterterrorism Division says, "The Counterterrorism Division is a division of the National Security Branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Counterterrorism Division basically, wait a minute now, it's been changed since yesterday. It's been changed. It said yesterday that it breeds terrorist threats inside the United States, but they've taken that out. since I started reporting on it. This said CTD breeds terrorist threats inside the United States, and the word breeds has been deleted. What I'm getting at is there are a number of people, including Bill Binney, who have told us that the majority of terrorist incidents within the United States have been caused by the FBI.
I represent, not everybody in this counterterrorism division is a bad person. I represented 2 FBI agents in the days leading up to 9/11 who came to me through Dave Shippers, who was the impeachment manager during the Clinton impeachment, who I became friendly with, who were exposing Saudi money laundering, some of which led to 9/11. When they sought to expose that and bring it to the attention of their superiors and try to conduct an investigation, that investigation was quashed. Ergo, 9/11 happened. And, I did everything I could to keep them getting drummed out of the FBI. One of them I hired to run the Chicago office of Judicial Watch. The other one's still there. I won't use their names just to protect them so they don't get retaliated against. But, they are good, honest people. But there are some really bad people, too. And the people working with Mueller, to say the least, are a bunch of lackeys that do what they're told, by this establishment, quote, God with a small g in Washington, D.C. by the name of Robert Mueller. And, this is the Democrat-Republican establishments all working together to destroy the President of the United States, Donald Trump. So, yes, it's part of a bigger story here, and whether it's President Trump, whether it's Jerome Corsi, whether it's the Bundys, whether it's Schaefer Cox, is that there are significant elements inside our federal law enforcement agencies who are corrupt, who behave in a criminal fashion, and think they can do whatever they want, and thus far they've gotten away with it. Most of these people, very few, haven't gotten away with it. And if Hillary Clinton can get away with all the crimes she's committed, they say, hey, why can't we? And it's a reality. And then people like Jeff Sessions, former Attorney General, they don't want to take them on because the blowback will smear them and destroy their career. So that's the world we live in today. We are in a revolutionary state, and we're trying to do it peacefully and legally at Freedom Watch, and I'm trying to do it peacefully and legally in my private capacity. But I think all hell's going to break loose into the future because we can't go on this way. I don't advocate it. I don't want to see it happen, but I believe it's going to happen.
I'm at this moment so stunned, Larry, because we really do have criminals running this government. And there are very few people who are standing up. I really must implore the audience to go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate, because to say it takes bravery, that's stating the obvious, but it's such a difficult battle that you are up to. Well, now see, this is interesting, and this is where we figure that Wikipedia is an unreliable source of information. I've gone back to this counterterrorism FBI page in the Internet Archive, and back in November of this year, it said that the CTD investigates terrorist threats inside the United States. So this is another interesting thing, disinformation. There was an article that I saw talking about an investigation into disinformation in the Roy Moore case, that they've mentioned that they're going to be opening an investigation, or what do we know about that?
Well, the Attorney General says he's looking at it in Alabama, and that's good. And as you know, I also represent Chief Justice Roy Moore in a case against Sacha Baron Cohen. And I filed a pleading yesterday. You can see that as well at larryklayman.com, because Sacha Baron Cohen was trying to pull a sting off on Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Ben Carson. And it really cements the fact that the case belongs in D.C., because Sacha Baron Cohen was camped out there for 3 weeks in the Mandarin Hotel. That's where he defrauded Judge Moore to go to get an award for Israel, but it wasn't that. It was to smear the judge and to slander him as a pedophile, which he's not. He's a good Christian man. But this is the age that we live in, Jason, is that anybody that stands up for anything is destroyed by these evil forces of the establishments of both political parties, and also the left. It's not even the extreme left, it's the left. And it is a war. And one side's going to win, and one side's going to lose. And I'm doing whatever I can to make sure that our side wins peacefully and legally. I can't tell you that every day I get up, and during every day, there's something that's burning inside of me. It's the same thing that was burning inside of Schaefer Cox or burning inside of other people. I don't, take any steps that I can be entrapped, by the federal government. I'm not saying Schaefer did, but I'm saying is that sometimes people will say things that they don't mean because they're so upset at the government. And we don't have a government anymore. We really don't. And you can see it with Trump. You can see it with the wall. You can see it with this witch Nancy Pelosi, just a vile human being, a disgusting, vile human being. Chuck Schumer, her alter ego in the Senate. And you've got these forces working against the American people. And they think that they're the nobility. They think that they know everything. They think that they get to call the shots. And I got news for them. That's what King George III thought. Turned out he wasn't right. So that's why I say if we can't use our legal system to bring it back to the vision of our founding fathers, we are headed into a violent revolution as predicted by Thomas Jefferson. He said we were going to get there, and we've gotten there. So if we don't do something now, peacefully and legally, we're going to have people in the streets left and right killing each other, and I don't think it's far off in the future. I don't want to see that. You don't want to see that. But that's the risk that we take right now.
I do think we are headed towards a completely lawless version of the United States of America, where prosecutors are in a regular practice of withholding exculpatory information, lying. Even at the day I went to the Bundy case, we heard witnesses testify about a particular type of camera, and the prosecutors used very specific language to describe that the camera live streamed to locations where it wasn't recorded. It was only after our Crowdsource the Truth audience identified the make and model of camera that fit the witness description that we suggested to the defense that they ask for recordings that might have been made in the camera itself, that then they revealed that there were. So this is the withholding of exculpatory evidence. This is the violation of the Brady Act, where a prosecutor, if they're aware of evidence that proves that the defendant is innocent, it's incumbent on them to reveal that evidence, not to hide it.
This first assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Nevada, Stephen Myre, M-A-H-R-E, a disgusting, evil, vile person, okay? If you read Vampires of the Vanities, or whatever it was called.
Bonfires of the Vanities, right?
Bonfires, yeah, Vampires of the Vanities.
That's the sequel.
Freudian slip, yeah. The prosecutors try to get ahead by getting the heads. They get scalps of their victims, okay? So Myre wanted to become U.S. attorney when, the government turned over to Trump, the Trump administration. So the Bundys were a great prize for him, okay? So therefore, he goes out there with his colleagues, Daniel Schaefer and Ahmed, the two other assistant U.S. attorneys, and they lie to the judge. They suborn perjury. They hide evidence that can acquit the Bundys and the other defendants. And this is the most evil thing that you can do to try to put people away to advance your career. It's disgusting. It's criminal. And Myre, has been demoted for the time being. He's no longer number one assistant, but he's still there. And it's an outrage.
Is this him, Larry, that I'm showing on the screen share here?
Maybe in his younger years, yeah. He doesn't look that well right now.
Got it.
Yeah, he's about 200 pounds heavier right now. But in any event, I'm exaggerating a bit just because I hate the guy. But the reality is that this is not unusual. It's regrettably not unusual. And, when I got out of law school, Emory Law School, and I went to the Justice Department ultimately, I started in Miami with a law firm, I really thought I wanted to be a prosecutor. And I don't want to be a prosecutor anymore. Not the way this system works, because you know what? You can't call the shots on your own. And that's why I left the Justice Department, later started Judicial Watch. The supervisor either tells you what to do, or you get demoted, or, you get sent to Siberia, the field office of the Justice Department there. You don't have the autonomy to do what you want to do. And a far more noble calling right now for a lawyer is to be a criminal defense lawyer. I won't represent anybody that I don't agree with or don't feel did the right thing.
Right.
I'm not going to represent pure criminals, but people that were set up, like the Bundys, like Schaefer, Cox, like Dr. Corsi,
Right.
They need representation. So please go to clivenbundydefensefund.org. We have to put a lot of effort into this appeal, and we're also, of course, filing the case. We have filed it to have the land declared to the people of Nevada and Clark County, not the federal government, so Cliven doesn't get harassed and threatened in the future.
Yeah.
And then we have our lawsuit on behalf of Ryan against these prosecutors and the government for malicious prosecution and violating constitutional rights. So the Bundy thing is far from over.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's just beginning.
And Larry, it's quite obvious, I think, to most viewers that this is the tried and true method. They just want to keep throwing lawsuits and criminal charges on these guys so that it requires more legal representation, more traveling to courts, more dealing with you and having you travel all around the country. Nobody's getting rich on this. When we tell people to go to the Cliven Bundy Legal Defense Fund or to CorsiNation.com or to freedomwatchusa.org, it's not so that you can, stack paper and make a ton of dough. The government is trying to really, it's a legal filibuster. This is lawfare being basically executed on these individuals. And, it's very interesting to me, Larry, when you mentioned, is it Mr. Wooten? Is that the guy who was the whistleblower?
Larry Wooten.
Larry Wooten. So when you look that up, because I remembered hearing about that story, and when you look it up, we're not seeing coverage from CNN and the New York Times and MSNBC. We got the New American, we've got OregonLive.com. These are, really not the Washington Standard. I mean, these aren't major mainstream outlets reporting on this. This was 1 year ago, and very few people have heard about this, I think, for the very reason that you've described. These senators and federal prosecutors and these other people seem to, I guess the Oregonian is kind of mainstream, right? Or this is Oregon Live.
No,
it's not.
Oregonian is left. Okay.
Right.
There's a woman there, Maxine Bernstein. I mean, she's not too far left, but she's left. I'll tell you, when I sat in that courtroom, reporters sat on the other side from the defendants, and 99% of them were leftists, and they were there basically sharpening their knives, really just salivating at the thought that the Bundys would be convicted. There were very few conservative journalists there. Ken Ritter of the AP, he's fair. Jeff German of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, David Ferrara, they're fair. But a lot of these reporters just were there to take the heads of the Bundys off. And you even had people from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you know who they are. I mean, they're a bunch of atheists.
Well, forgetting about anybody's politics, the fact is here we've got a guy inside a government agency coming forward saying, hey, I work for the Bureau of Land Management. Here's what I saw. It was a federal agency targeting U.S. citizens, planning to kill them in the way that a gang or the mafia or some crazy crew of criminals would. And the one difference between these guys and a gang is that they have the entire force of the U.S. government, the federal prison system, everything behind them. This guy, Schaefer Cox, rots in prison. He could be being assaulted daily. I mean, as you said, the guy...
Jason, that a murder occurred a few weeks ago. A Christian inmate was killed, and a Jewish inmate had his throat slit in the same cell block as Schaefer Cox. And when we complained about his safety, the warden threw him in solitary confinement. So, this is the way it works. You're not allowed to say anything. If you're a prisoner, you have no rights, but you do have rights, okay? And in fact, cruel and unusual punishment is in the Constitution. So I've actually gone to the Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C., to the acting director, Hurwitz, and his general counsel to get some relief here. But yes, Schaefer Cox's life is in danger.
It's very scary to know that, here we are, walking around enjoying our freedom here in the United States. But yet someone like Jerome Corsi, someone like Schaefer Cox, when the government decides you're doing something that is not in their interest, they can make up a story, they can kick in your door, they can harass your family, they can conduct some kind of disinformation campaign to sort of try to psychologically push you to the point of doing something. In the case of the Bundys, the Bureau of Land Management wanted them to wield guns and do something that could be met with a deadly force response. In the case of Schaefer Cox, they've got an FBI provocateur who's getting him into some situation where they can create this evidence that's presented in court that lands him in jail. The thing that's so scary that people need to really appreciate, Larry, is that jail, the jail population, whether you're guilty or not, once you are in that population, you are under a degree of control that those of us on the outside of that can really only begin to imagine what it might be like.
It's unimaginable, you know, and when I say I hate Stephen Myra, I don't hate him as a person. I wouldn't do anything to harm him or anything like that, but I would like to see him in prison, okay? And, you know, if it takes the rest of my legal career to get him there, I will do it, because people like this, there need to be an example made.
Yeah.
That you don't advance your career by destroying people and putting them away for life that don't deserve it, and then hide exculpatory evidence, lie to the judge, threaten whistleblowers, and suborn perjury. And this is a Justice Department lawyer that, God forbid, almost became. He was acting for a while, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Nevada. I mean, so Stephen Myra and his colleagues, Sheese and Ahmed, they're poster children for cleaning up the Justice Department, as are, you know, others like Robert Mueller. And it just gets under my skin, because I really believed, I was so proud to be a Justice Department lawyer, you know, and you know, frankly, it's an open sewer right now. I mean, I think that's the nicest way you can put it.
It's so dangerous, Larry, because, you know, someone who does this type of criminal collusion to hide evidence, to put some important person in jail to satisfy a Harry Reid or whoever. I mean, this is how these guys are sort of climbing not the corporate ladder, of course, but the political ladder, whatever it is. And, you know, where does a president select the attorney general from but U.S. attorneys, state attorney generals, etc.? And we're just hearing story after story from legal experts, from people who were wrongly convicted, from various guests who are coming on the show about these prosecutors, about these U.S. attorneys who are knowingly doing these things, and instead of being, you know, held to task and being brought to justice over these matters, they're being promoted and they're going on to do even worse things. When we hear... Sorry.
Now you've hit the nail on the head. Why are they taking this appeal? Why? Why is our so-called government taking this appeal? Because inside the Justice Department, there's a circle the wagon mentality. So they're taking an appeal hoping that the Ninth Circuit makes some rulings that will preserve Myra's career and Sheese's career and Ahmed's career and the former U.S. Attorney Daniel Bogdan, who was in on this too. That's why they're doing it, is to protect their own. And who is the appellate lawyer who's handling this? Elizabeth White from the same U.S. Attorney's office, okay? That's why she's hostile to me, hostile to the Bundys, disrespectful, low class, unethical. You know, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell it like it is. And
we need you to.
They're protecting their own. But at the expense of people that could wind up, God forbid, in prison for the rest of their lives for a crime they didn't commit. And what could be worse than that? I don't know if anything could be worse short of murdering somebody, you know, and it's just, I mean, it's the equivalent of it. So, you know, you can't, it's unimaginable. And that's why we do need this support, because, you know, the Bundys succeeded with the standoff, but they're coming back to get them. It's like Star Wars, okay? The Force is coming back. And the Force is very powerful. And these prosecutors are like Darth Vader.
Well, it's like the Terminator. They never give up.
Well, because they have all the cards, you see. And they think they can't be held accountable. They think they can't be prosecuted. And when they get into trouble, then their fellow colleagues circle the wagons. And then a lot of these judges will circle the wagons too for them. It's part of this giant club. and it's the justice system. And it's frankly why my legal profession, it's why I started Judicial Watch in 1994, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. Legal profession, is so corrupt, and there's so few people there that will stand up for what's right. I listen to Ken Starr on TV. I want to throw up. Everything's perfect. This is the way it's supposed to work. This is the way it happens. Or Judge Napolitano. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, and you have to be in the trenches and you have to care, because most lawyers just care about making money. They care about the status, and they don't care about actually making the system right again, because they're making money hand over fist. Same thing with the politicians in Washington. And that's why I do what I do, and that's why my clients are like me, whether it's the Bundys or Schaefer Cox or Judge Roy Moore or Sheriff Joe Arpaio or Jerry Corsi. These people love this country. They want to make the change peacefully and legally, as I do, but they also want to see the real criminals held accountable. And until they're held accountable, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Holders, the Lynches, the Peter Strzok's, the Lisa Pages, the Comeys, it's going to continue. And they're all a big club. Democrats and Republicans, big club.
Yeah.
There are very few people out there in our justice system who stand for anything like Judge Royce Lamberth, like Judge Leon, like Judge Sullivan, and just a few others. But, I take solace in the fact that I believe God's on our side. And I believe that we will prevail ultimately.
Larry, this is one of the most serious problems facing our nation, because whether people like Donald Trump or dislike Donald Trump, whether you voted for him, whether you like Obama, whoever it is, we're seeing a clear pattern that when the justice system, when the police, when the FBI, whoever it is, when they decide they want you targeted for persecution via prosecution, they have essentially unlimited resources to do it, including the collusion of the press. And it takes me back for a moment to this matter of Roy Moore, because I was very surprised to see this being reported on in the Washington Post, of all places. Do you know what they're talking about specifically with this disinformation campaign?
Yeah, why is the Washington Post interested in this? They destroyed Roy Moore, okay?
Right.
Washington Post is on the short list, basically, when we have time. We'll take care of the Washington Post, too. Judge Moore has brought cases against some of the women that came forward and lied. He's not afraid of that, Sacha Baron Cohen and others. But we haven't forgotten about the Washington Post. But they're interested in this because this was the same technique that the Russians used. So what they're saying is, well, because the Russians sent the election to Trump, maybe those techniques were also used with regard to Roy Moore. They're trying to play both sides. But Washington Post is no friend of Judge Roy Moore.
But there's certainly no evidence that the Russians did anything with the election other than $4,700 worth of Google ads. The reason I'm so interested in this story of a disinformation campaign is because, again, I've noticed a pattern. There was a disinformation campaign about Dr. Corsi that started first in social media. We heard a lot of clowns and morons publishing stories that didn't seem to have any factual basis, or would take the most tenuous connection to a person or a location or a organization and somehow spin that into, this person is affiliated with this country. And the same thing is happening with me. I haven't been accused of any criminal charges, although if any of the things that the disinformation campaigns about me were remotely true, Robert Mueller and the FBI should be breaking in my door right now. So I think it's important that we expose these types of disinformation campaigns, and I'm hopeful that laws, if they don't currently exist, it seems like the people that are doing these disinformation campaigns are very adept at avoiding civil torts and criminal activity by distributing it. The Washington Post can say, well, BuzzFeed reported this, and then they're not actually saying it. They're reporting on something somebody else said. This is a big problem, I think.
That's right. And, Freedom Watch has a leftist media strike force. We have lawsuits that we brought against Jeff Zucker, CEO of CNN, Chris Cuomo, Huffington Post, Rolling Stone, for Sheriff Arpaio. They called him a felon. He's not a felon. He was found liable for a misdemeanor. He was pardoned for it, and it's still up on appeal to the Ninth Circuit. It'll probably be thrown out in the end. That case was assigned to Judge Royce Lamberth randomly. We have cases for Judge Moore against Sacha Baron Cohen and other lawsuits against the leftist media, and we have to fight back. Now, there's some in the conservative media that aren't terribly honest either, I might add, and we're not going to hold back on them either at the right time and the right place. Notice that whenever they talk about Dr. Corsi, even from some so-called conservative publications, he's a right-wing conspiracy theorist.
They always lead with that.
Right. Now, you know what? I don't know of anything Dr. Corsi's ever written that has been proven to be wrong, frankly. And the fact that he'll write about it is why I love the guy, because most people won't do it. You talk about Obama's fraudulent birth certificate. O'Reilly on Fox would never talk about it. Fox won't talk about it. But yes, it is fraudulent, okay? Doesn't mean he was born in Kenya, although I think he probably was born somewhere outside the country, but doesn't mean that. And, John Kerry, the fact that John Kerry was a traitor, okay? Many of the people that served with him came forward and said that. That's why he lost the presidential election. So that doesn't mean you're a conspiracy theorist because you tell the truth and you're willing to stick your neck out. And you know what? Nothing wrong with being a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracies happen. You know what happens, okay?
Yeah.
So
there's conspiracies happening all over the place, and unless we have one of the co-conspirators coming forward with a confession, anything we discuss about any crime involving more than two people is essentially a conspiracy theory. Now, Larry,
Dr. Corsi had the courage to write about Obama, who had relationships with 3 men in Chicago in bathhouses. Okay?
And they came forward and offered their cell phone records of calling Obama, et cetera. That's hardcore evidence that just never gets investigated.
You talk about the fact that this guy obviously is not what he claims to be, and that is relevant. So, that's the kind of thing that sticks under my craw, is that, we should have a First Amendment. You should be able to say your piece.
Right.
And Dr. Corsi, first of all, never had any contact with WikiLeaks. But even if he had, which he didn't, there's nothing wrong with that. So why are they persecuting him?
Right.
He didn't steal documents. He didn't participate in anything to that effect. Yeah. So, that's what we're dealing with.
We're so far away from the target with what they're talking about. It's crazy. Larry, in our last 2 minutes here, I just wanted to mention one thing. I was in Florida earlier this week, and I had the opportunity to meet with our mutual friend and colleague, Laura Loomer. And Laura was kicking around the idea of a possible run for Congress there in Florida, potentially against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We did a little informal poll on Twitter, and out of over 4,000 respondents, 94% in an overwhelming victory said that Laura should indeed run for Congress. Do you have any advice for Laura from a legal standpoint, or how to go about doing that?
Well, I do. I mean, I ran for Senate in Florida. I know something about Florida politics. I'm from Florida. My former volunteer colleague, Joe Kaufman, ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz last time. He did pretty well, actually. It's going to be tough in that Fort Lauderdale area. The Broward County. But if she wants to win, I think maybe she might want to move north to, a county near Ocala, Florida, which is where I had my campaign headquarters for a while when I was running. It's going to be really tough. I hope she wins. And in my personal capacity, I would support her. But it's really tough. I mean, it's a very, very liberal area.
Well, we wish Laura luck, and perhaps offline you guys can have a conversation about some of the legal details. Larry, Angels to Earth is watching us on Periscope right now and saying that they tried to donate, but PayPal was the only option, and they refused to accept the donation. I'm not sure what that's about, but it's interesting to see that PayPal is causing problems. I mean, there's all these levers of control that when people like you or I or Carl Benjamin or Milo Yiannopoulos or Alex Jones or Dr. Corsi, when you get in the way, there are all these methods that can be used to stymie that progress. So I really want to encourage people to go to freedomwatchusa.org. And what can people do if they run into a problem with PayPal, Larry?
Well, let me know. Send me an email at leklayman@gmail.com. Leklayman, Klayman @gmail.com. Now that I've heard this, I don't know, maybe it was just one guy who didn't do it right, but I will have our web guy check with PayPal. They better not be messing around, or they'll be sued by tomorrow morning.
Larry is not a person to be trifled with if you don't want to be sued. So Larry, I got to thank you for everything that you're doing. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and you're getting ready for a prosperous 2019. We really need Donald Trump to act. We really need an investigation along the lines of what Rudy Giuliani was talking about. I don't think I got a chance to get to that, but of course we saw this article in The Hill that Giuliani is calling for Mueller to be investigated for the destruction of FBI evidence. I don't know why he's calling for it and not just having the president launch an investigation.
Yeah, I think he had a couple martinis there. I mean, that's not going to happen, you know. Are you kidding me? So my message to Rudy Giuliani, who's a nice man, you know, go on the wagon and start doing some legal work. That's basically.
I hope they'll just bring that investigation instead of talking about it, because it really does seem, and I certainly wasn't aware of this prior to doing shows with you and Brian Vukadinovich and the Becks and some of the other legal experts that we deal with, but I was never aware of the degree to which it is a regular practice for prosecutors to be destroying evidence, hiding evidence, doing basically whatever they want to obstruct actual justice. And I am so glad that we've got freedomwatchusa.org and Larry Klayman and his brave team of associates who are fighting for us in a way that really nobody else is. Larry, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and all the cases that you're doing to join me. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens at this hearing with Judge Leon on behalf of Dr. Corsi. Dr. Corsi has my support, as do you, and thank you so much for what you're doing, Larry.
Look forward to seeing you there, Jason. Thank you for what you do, because it's, you're the complement of what we do. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. Remember, Crowdsource the Truth is also viewer supported, so please go to paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth and make a one-time sponsorship payment, or you can become a monthly sponsor at patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thank you, Larry. See everybody soon.
Good night. Thank you, Jason.